Thanksgiving had always been one of those days that felt heavier than it was supposed to. The smell of roasting turkey and cinnamon, spiced pies usually made me think of warmth, family, laughter. But this year it hit me like a sharp gust of cold wind. I stepped into the living room holding my apron in my hands, still smelling faintly of garlic and sauté-ed onions from the restaurant shift I'd worked just to make some extra money. My parents were sitting on the couch, smiling at each other like conspirators while my sister leaned against the armrest, radiant in a brand new dress that made her glow. And then, there he was, her fiancé, looking perfectly composed and polished, a man I barely knew, his teeth flashing in a practiced smile. Before I could even offer a hello, my mother's eyes flicked to my uniform and her smile tightened. "Oh, you're still wearing that," she said, as if I'd just committed a crime. My father leaned forward, and both of them spoke in the same tone that had haunted me since childhood, sharp, deliberate, and filled with judgment. "Sweetheart, we don't think it's appropriate for you to be here tonight. Your sister's fiancé wants a classy dinner. Your restaurant uniform would ruin the photos." I blinked. The words echoed in my head, but my mouth felt suddenly dry. My chest tightened. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat as if it were trying to warn me, trying to tell me this wasn't just a small oversight, they didn't want me there. Not because of the uniform. Not because of the classiness of the dinner. Because, apparently, I wasn't worth their image tonight. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. My sister, who I had once shared secrets and dreams with, glanced at me apologetically, or maybe it was just pity. But it hit harder than anger, and her fiancé, he didn't even look at me. Not once. He was already imagining himself in some family portrait where I, in my apron, would ruin the perfection of his new life. "Och, got it," I whispered, forcing the words out like a fragile balloon. They didn't hear the tremor beneath the calm. They didn't see the storm swirling behind my eyes, and that somehow made it worse. Because I didn't explode. I didn't cry. I nodded, turned, and walked toward the door, my apron brushing against my leg, my hands gripping it as if it were a lifeline. Once I was outside, the cold November air hit me, and I felt the sting of betrayal fully. All those years I had tried, staying late to help with chores, picking up the slack when they were busy, trying to fit into a mold I thought they wanted me in, it hadn't mattered. None of it. Tonight, I realized, I had never been part of the image they wanted. I was just background noise, disposable, someone to be kept out of the frame when the world was watching. I walked the streets, feeling a strange combination of fury and sadness. My phone buzzed, a message from a friend asking if I wanted to join for a casual dinner. I stared at it but didn't respond immediately. How could I explain that my own family had rejected me for wearing a uniform that I was proud of, for working hard to pay my own bills, for existing as myself? I felt the weight of the invisible chains my parents had placed on me for so long, chains made of expectations, appearances, and a constant, quiet judgment. By the time I returned to my tiny apartment, I was exhausted, not just from walking but from the emotional drain of being invisible in my own family. I closed the door behind me, leaned against it, and let myself breathe for the first time in hours. In that silence, the anger that had been simmering beneath the surface began to crystallize into something sharp and clear. They wanted to exclude me, they wanted to shame me. Fine, I would make them remember me, not by yelling or confronting them tonight, not by begging for acceptance, but by showing them that underestimating me was their first and biggest mistake. I didn't know yet how I would do it, but I felt the first spark of a plan ignite. A quiet, patient, unstoppable spark, and as I looked at my reflection in the kitchen window, framed by the dim city lights, I whispered to myself, not as a plea, not as a question, but as a promise, they will see me, they will remember me, and it won't be on their terms. The morning after Thanksgiving, my apartment felt quieter than usual, almost heavy with the echoes of the previous night. I moved around mechanically, making coffee, scrolling through my phone, half looking at messages from friends who didn't understand why I was so quiet, so withdrawn. But I wasn't sad anymore, at least, not in the way I had been last night. That raw, sharp ache of exclusion had dulled into something colder, something sharper, like ice forming inside me. It was anger now, tempered by clarity. I sat at the small kitchen table, my apron folded neatly on the chair beside me, a silent reminder of what had happened. My parents hadn't just rejected me, they had dismissed me. My sister hadn't defended me, and her fiancé, he hadn't even looked. The thought made my stomach tighten, but instead of breaking me, it lit something inside me. They assumed I would disappear quietly, that I would fade into the background like I always had, and they were wrong. I began thinking, carefully, almost clinically, about the way my family operated. My parents were obsessed with appearances, with control, with maintaining an image that suggested perfection, even when everything underneath was messy. My sister lived in her own little bubble, completely absorbed by her life and her new fiancé, and he had this aura of self-importance, a belief that he could step into their world and nothing would ever be messy enough to touch him. It didn't take long for a plan to start forming. It wasn't about confrontation, it wasn't about screaming or storming back into their lives. No, this had to be something they couldn't anticipate, something subtle but undeniable, a demonstration that I wasn't the disposable background character they assumed I was. I started quietly, almost innocuously. I looked up small details about the fiancé from social media, notes my sister had carelessly left on the kitchen counter when she visited, even casual mentions in conversations my parents had forgotten I had overheard. His favorite coffee shop, the book he'd been reading, the exact way he liked his shirts pressed. I didn't plan to use these in a way that was cruel. I planned to use them in a way that would make the truth undeniable. His eyes and my family's eyes, all of them, would widen when they realized they had misjudged me. I spent the next few days like a shadow, careful, precise. Every shift at the restaurant became part of the plan, every plate I served, every interaction with customers a quiet sharpening of my focus. I practiced patience. Patience would make the eventual reveal sweeter. I rehearsed phrases in my mind, ways to remain calm, unflappable, while they fumbled in their ignorance. My parents had trained me unknowingly to be exactly what I needed now: observant, clever, composed. By midweek, I felt the first twinges of anticipation. A strange thrill had replaced the dull ache of being overlooked. I wasn't plotting to humiliate anyone, I was plotting to be seen. To make them understand, in a single, undeniable moment, that their assumptions had been wrong, that their obsession with appearances and classy dinners had blinded them. I even thought about my sister. She had always been the golden child, effortlessly charming, effortlessly adored. But this plan wasn't about hurting her. It was about exposing the truth to all of them, including her, about how far I had come, about how underestimated I had been. I wanted them to see me, really see me, and to feel that momentary shock, the jolt of realizing they had misjudged someone they claimed to love. And then there was the final piece, the encounter. I didn't yet know exactly how it would play out, but I knew it would involve the fiancé, the image of perfection he clung to, and my own quiet composure. One sentence, one look, could change everything. I could almost see it: the hesitation in his posture, the pause in conversation, the sudden awareness of who I really was. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt calm. I smiled slightly, not at anyone in particular, just at the thought of their faces when the plan finally unfolded. It wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be messy, but it would be unforgettable. And in that moment I realized something crucial: this wasn't revenge born of spite, it was revenge born of justice, born of being seen for who I was when everyone else had turned their backs. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet settle around me, letting the plan take shape fully in my mind. The pieces were falling into place. And when the moment came, I would be ready. They wouldn't see it coming. Not at all. The knock came early the next morning, sharp, impatient, and loud enough to rattle the thin door of my apartment. I didn't jump. Somehow I'd been expecting it. I took a slow breath, set my coffee mug down on the counter, and walked to the door at an unhurried pace. Calm was important. Calm was power. When I opened it, my parents stood there, coats half buttoned, expressions tight with irritation and something else beneath it: panic. My mother's eyes immediately scanned the apartment behind me, as if she expected to find chaos or evidence of some dramatic breakdown. My father crossed his arms, jaw clenched. "What is going on with you?" my mother demanded, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You embarrassed us last night." I closed the door gently and leaned against it. "I embarrassed you?" I asked quietly. My father snapped. "Walking out like that, saying nothing. Do you have any idea how that looked?" I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I tilted my head slightly, studying them the way I had learned to do over years of trying to anticipate their moods. "You told me not to come," I said. "So I didn't? That's not the point," my mother said sharply. "You could have changed, you could have tried, you made it awkward." There it was. Not concern, not regret, image, always image. Before I could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Voices followed: my sister's, anxious and rushed, and another voice layered beneath it, calm and unfamiliar in this space. My stomach didn't tighten, it settled. This was earlier than I expected, but timing, I realized, didn't have to be perfect to be effective. The door opened again, and my sister stepped in, her eyes immediately landing on me. "What's going on?" she asked, forcing a smile that didn't quite hold. Behind her stood her fiancé. He stopped the moment he saw me, not glanced. Not a polite acknowledgement, he stopped. Something flickered across his face, confusion first, then recognition, then something that looked dangerously close to disbelief. His posture changed, shoulders squaring, eyes sharpening as he took me in the apartment, the framed certificates on the wall behind me, the neatly stacked books, the familiar apron folded on the chair. My parents were still talking, voices overlapping, words blurring into noise. My sister looked between us, unsettled. Then he spoke. "Oh," he said slowly, his voice cutting cleanly through the room. "You're her." Silence fell like a dropped plate. I met his eyes calmly. "I am." He let out a short, incredulous laugh, not mocking but stunned. "You didn't tell me your sister was the executive chef who designed the menu for the charity gala last month." My mother froze. My father's arms dropped to his sides. My sister turned sharply toward him. "What?" He didn't look at them. His gaze stayed on me, something like respect dawning there. "The one everyone's been talking about," he continued. "The restaurant that got featured in 3 publications this year. I've been trying to get a meeting with you." You could have heard a pin drop. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. My father looked at me as if seeing a stranger. My sister's face drained of color. My mother started, then faltered. You work at a restaurant." I smiled then, not wide, not smug. "Yes," I said, "I do." The fiancé shook his head slowly, amazement still written across his face. "That uniform," he added, glancing at the apron, "that's something people would kill to wear." No one spoke. In that moment I felt it, the shift. The balance tipping. Years of dismissal, of being overlooked, of being treated like an inconvenience instead of a person, all crystallized into this single quiet victory. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't defended myself. I hadn't needed to. The truth had done it for me. My parents stood there, stunned and speechless, their carefully constructed image cracking right down the middle. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing outside the frame, I was the center of it. The room stayed silent for a long moment, thick with tension, as my parents' faces shifted through shock, disbelief, and something painfully close to shame. My sister's fiancé had already stepped forward, eyes still fixed on me, and the weight of his words hung in the air like a spark over dry kindling. "You're the chef," he said again, quieter this time, almost reverently. "The one who designed that tasting menu that sold out in days. The one who trained that staff to the point where the restaurant earned its first Michelin star." I nodded, keeping my expression calm, almost serene. There was no gloating, no triumphant smirk. Just the quiet certainty of someone who had been underestimated for years finally being seen. My parents' mouths opened and closed like fish, trying and failing to form words. My sister's eyes widened, her carefully constructed world trembling. "But you never said anything?" she stammered, voice catching. "I didn't think you were listening," I replied softly. The words were calm, but each one carried a quiet sting. "Or maybe you didn't want to." Her fiancé glanced at her, then back at me, nodding slowly. "I would have wanted to know," he said. "I would have paid attention." The reality of their collective oversight crashed over them like a wave. My parents had been so obsessed with appearances, classy dinners, perfect photos, the image of a flawless family, that they had completely ignored the reality of who I was, what I had achieved, and what I was capable of. All those years of hard work, the nights spent balancing school and shifts, the sacrifices I had made invisible. Until now, I let them stew for a moment longer, not cruelly, not maliciously, just long enough for the silence to emphasize the truth. Then I stepped into the center of the room, the space that had always felt off limits, the place where I had been relegated to the edges of their lives. "I didn't come to Thanksgiving," I said softly, "because you told me I wasn't welcome, because you didn't think I fit into your version of perfection. And that's fine, but know this: I'm more than your opinions, your rules, your photos. I am me. And I've been me all along, whether you noticed or not." My sister's fiancé nodded again, almost in approval, almost as if he were silently applauding the restraint and power in my words. He looked at my parents, then back at me, and his next words cut cleanly through the tension. "She's exactly the person I want to know. The one who makes things happen, the one who commands respect, the one who can stand in any room and own it." The statement hit like a hammer. My parents froze. My sister's jaw dropped. Even she couldn't look away. They had built their judgments on surface, level impressions, assumptions, and appearances, but he had seen the truth immediately, and now so had I, in the mirror of their stunned silence. I felt a strange, delicious weight lift off my shoulders. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense, it was justice, recognition. Validation. All the years of being underestimated, ignored, and dismissed crystallized into this one undeniable moment. My existence, my work, my worth, it couldn't be ignored anymore. My mother finally found her voice, shaky and small. "Where we didn't know." "It's not about whether you knew," I said gently. "It's about whether you saw, and clearly you chose not to." The room grew quiet again, the tension settling into a new order. I could see the slow understanding forming on my sister's face, the mixture of regret and awe. My parents, stubborn as they were, looked both embarrassed and awed, the kind of awe reserved for moments when someone proves them wrong without raising their voice, without confrontation, simply by being undeniable. I smiled faintly, not triumphantly, but with quiet satisfaction. I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to force them to acknowledge me. They had already done it themselves, and as I looked around the room, I realized that this was more than just a moment of recognition. It was a turning point, a silent promise that I would no longer be invisible, that no uniform, no expectation, no carefully staged photo could define my worth. I stood there, calm, collected, in the quiet glow of morning sunlight spilling into the apartment, and for the first time in years I felt completely, undeniably seen, and they would never forget it.